Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the Prepare for the Fair series. This is session one of Rev Up Your Resume series, and we're just going to talk about getting started with the resume. I'm Heather Rickrell. I'm the career counselor and assistant director of career services at University of Wisconsin Superior. So we're going to go through a couple things today about getting started on the resume. But first, I have a trivia question for you. Um, on the subject of the resume, the question is, although his resume was technically in the form of a letter, who's credited with the first resume in either the year 1481 or 1482? There's two clues here. Here's the man himself. Here's one of his famous works. Give you a second or two to think about that. Who is it? It's Leonardo da Vinci. He's known to have written the first resume, which he sent to potential employer Ludovico Sforza. You can learn more and actually see his letter and then see it translated at the website listed here. So lettersofnote.com under this an article called The Skills of Leonardo da Vinci. So just something kind of interesting that I thought it would be fun to share with you all. Okay, go to the next slide here. A little bit of origin and definition about resumes. It comes from the French word resume, meaning summary, which is why it's not said like the word resume, kind of the way we typically spell it in America. It's a summary, which means it's meant to be short. So it shouldn't be anything that's a long document. It's a marketing tool in which the content that you put out there should really be adapted to suit each individual job application. And what you're adapting to is the job announcement or the job description that you might be seeing posted online or whatever it is you're seeing those. It covers your relevant job history and experiences. So I like to remind students that resumes equal relevancy. Resumes are all about relevancy. When you're doing your resume, you want to make sure that you display your skills with context. So give the employer a good idea of what your skills and experiences are amongst the context of what you've done. And the last thing is that they, by definition, have licenses, certificates, trainings, education, all of those sorts of things listed on them. What resumes are is a tool to help you sell yourself to a potential employer. So you can really think of your resume as an advertisement or brochure, a piece of marketing that that you've branded that's going out to employers. So I'm ultimately the goal of the resume is to get you an interview. It's to get you in the door. So this means the resume is really helping that employer or whoever's reading your resume form their first impression of you as a candidate for their position or to become, a member of their organization or team. So that's what it does. It's supposed to get you in the door, get you an interview, and then help the reader form a first impression of you. So you have to ask yourself, is this what I want people to be getting from reading this resume? There's sort of two strategies for how to get started with a resume. There's sort of this make list kind of way that's listed on this slide. And then there's another strategy where you kind of fill in the categories. So, this first strategy, and I won't go into these too much in detail, but you can find out what skills, knowledge, and experience are needed to do the target job. So, you would find that in the position description, but you can also um, look up on LinkedIn which skills kind of go in which job titles. So that's a function in LinkedIn that's pretty handy. So you can see kind of the common skills that graphic designers have, for instance, or what basic skills um, chemical technicians have, or something like that. You can make a list of your 3 or 4 strongest skills, abilities, and knowledges that make you a good candidate. You can think of accomplishments from your past work history that illustrate your skills and write those down. You can make a list of the primary jobs you've held, put them in chronological order so you're sure you're not missing any, and you can include any unpaid work that fills any gaps. And that unpaid work, you might call it volunteer work, but anything that is of a longer time frame where you spend, a chunk of time per week, several hours a week doing this, it can definitely count as professional experience. So, for instance, somebody who works 5 to 10 hours a week at the local food bank, and has been doing that for 6 months or longer, something like that. I would say go ahead and count that as professional experience. You can make a list of your training and education that's related to the job announcement or the job field, and that will also help you get started. The second way to get started with a resume is to write it out by category. Um, if you're kind of wondering what sections might be found on a resume, you can go to the resume section headings document that's on the UWS Career Services website. And that document will give you just a pretty exhaustive list of section headings that might be on a resume. So, as far as how a resume might be organized section by section, I've somewhat put them in order here, although it may really depend based on what sorts of things you have in these categories. Did you just graduate? Are you several years beyond graduation? Are you a career changer? Those things are all going to determine what comes first on your resume. So sometimes the first thing I will see on a resume is the objective. And the objective can be a bit of a danger point there because employers tell us that objectives are either too specific or they're not specific enough. And so they get a little hung up on that. They're also kind of a obsolete, kind of an outdated thing, and they don't need to see them and don't want to see them, and they'd rather that students just start in with their education. And so I recommend that you don't include an objective unless they ask it of you. So that's the danger with objectives, is that they're obsolete and they don't really do you any favors there. Typically the first thing that comes after a name block is the education section. So right now you're probably a student at UWS. If you have any community or technical college experience, you should put that in there as well, especially if you've earned a degree. So in the education section, you want to make sure anytime you've earned a degree that it's there. There's only one exception, and that is high school. So you do not put your high school information up. And the only reason is that once you get into a school setting, a college or university setting like UWS, the common knowledge is that you completed high school because that's a basic requirement to get into college or university. Typically, the next thing I will see is experience. Um, some students call this work experience, some students call this professional experience. If you call it professional experience, then you can include both your paid and your volunteer experience. And the only caveat to the volunteer experience is if you put it in the professional experience category, it needs to be, several hours a week where you've done it, you've got some longevity in that volunteer position. So the experience section is not where you put your one time a year or kind of your one-off things like volunteering for the, as a um, timer for the 5K or something like that. Those kind of one-off things will go in probably the next section, which is activities or campus and community involvement. I like the community involvement, the term community, because it lets you really define your community however you choose to define it. So your community might be your campus community. It could be whatever you consider to be your home community, could be your faith community, your identity community, could be an ability community, could be a political community, whatever that happens to be. Um, you can use just that community involvement piece and have a broad umbrella that covers it all. Resumes typically will have training, certifications, professional development. So things that I would consider in there, if you've completed a certificate program from UW Superior, that definitely goes in there. any sort of certification where you've tested and those sorts of things go in there, or you've completed some sort of a rigorous program. Any trainings, you should definitely, if you have lifeguard training and certification, first aid, CPR, a lot of those sorts of things. I know that the legal studies majors typically have city research training for working with people in research. So those are things that can go in there. Any conferences that you've attended, workshops, stuff like that, all goes under that professional development category. There's the specialized skills category. This is really truly for specialized skills. So things like um, fluency in another language, or let's say that you are a chemistry student and different titration methods or procedures, or you know how to use a certain microscope or something like that. Specialized skills are not things like technology use or um, saying like I'm organized, I'm a good problem solver. When you use those generalized skills like that, you're not giving the employer any context, and so they have no reason to actually believe you have them. Whereas when you're listing very specialized skills, it would be pretty hard to come up with those without being in the know about them. And so that's the danger with specialized skills is you want to truly be sure they're specialized and not just a list of skills. Um, Many UWS students have publications or they are upcoming publications. So go ahead and list those. I have honors listed here. That would be like Dean's List, scholarships, things like that. Typically, we don't put that on a resume because, again, resumes are about relevancy. And while being a great student is awesome, and you definitely should shoot for that, employers are more interested in the skills, abilities, and experience. And so you want to save more room on the resume for those things. There may be other categories. So, like for instance, research would be one of them for sure. Um, I have a little box that pops up here just to remind you about objectives and honors and sometimes publications. Those can be more common on a CV. So, what goes in it? If it's a standard resume, use the categories that I mentioned on the previous slide, or check out the section headers on the UWS Career Services resume page that you see here. I just mentioned CVs like not even a minute ago. CVs are really different from resumes. So remember, I said resumes are about relevancy. CV stands for curriculum vitae, which translates to course of life. So in the US, they're commonly used for graduate school applications and positions in academia. So, for instance, I have a CV. It's about 11 pages long, right? So CVs are really a complete record of everything for me from the time I started undergrad. They have unlimited length. I know people who have 20-page CVs, right? It's really important in the US that we remember that CVs and resumes are not interchangeable. Okay, so resumes and CVs are not the same thing in the US. A lot of people try to use that word interchangeably. They don't mean the same thing in the US. In other countries, they do, right? In other countries, what they consider a resume might look an awful lot like what we consider a CV here. Also, in other countries, resumes or CVs might include much more personal information than we would ever put on an American resume. So if you're confused about exactly what goes on a resume, what is a CV, make sure you get into virtual drop-in hours, virtual office hours for career services, and we'll be happy to help you out with that. Um, Again, CVs are long, they're lengthy, they don't leave anything out, and resumes are much shorter and they're all about relevancy. So that's a little bit about getting started with writing your resume. A great place for you to start if you're ready to start writing right now is to go to the resume formatting sections document, suggestions document on the Career Services website. That's here. You can also search it or it's on the resumes and letters page. And I think that is all I have. This might be a next slide here. Next week's session, Rev Up Your Resume, session 2 is going to cover style and details. So, basic do's and don'ts of resume writing and writing strong duty or bulleted statements, which are another hallmark of the resume. So, I hope you've learned a few things and are feeling confident about getting started with your writing your resume. And I will see you next week to talk about style and details of your resume. Thanks for watching.